Thank you, Marcy and Zoom lady. All right, good evening, everyone. I would like to call the regular meeting of Los Altos School District Board of Trustees to order. A recording and/or broadcast of this meeting is being made at the direction of the board, and the recording and/or broadcast may capture images and sounds of those attending the meeting. Now I'll do the roll call. Steve Taglio. Jessica Spicer.
Here.
Vladimir Ivanovich.
Here.
Ryan Johnson.
Here.
I, Vaishali Sirke, am here as well. All right, agenda approval. Would any board members like to provide comment on the agenda? Nope. Okay, then may I please have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I move to approve tonight's agenda.
I'm going to be
I'll second
moving
that.
and seconding at this rate. Okay. The motion to approve tonight's agenda was made by Jessica and seconded by Steve. Let's do a roll call vote. Steve?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Vladimir?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. Closed session report. The board directed staff in closed session to finalize correspondence directed to the Santa Clara County Board of Education and the Santa Clara County Office of Education regarding the support for the actions taken to ensure equity and access at the Bullis Charter School. No other action was taken. Okie doke. Next agenda item. Recognition of retiring employees at the conclusion of the 2020-21 school year. Mr. Bear.
Yes, thank you. This is the time of year that we do have employees let us know that they are planning to retire and end their careers from LASD, and this year's no exception. It's great to see so many of the people here who we're going to recognize tonight. We were able to see most all of them today as we dropped off some goodies for them, either at their work location or their homework location. So next slide, Marcy. We're going to start with our classified staff. Go ahead and click again, maybe. Well, while she is pulling that up, I will just jump in. The first employee is Elaine Bernard. She retired actually mid-year from Los Altos School District. Elaine has worked for our district, serving the students and staff for 21 years. She worked at Oak and she worked at Santa Rita. She's mostly remembered for her work at Oak most recently. She also substitute taught periodically as well. Elaine was a fixture in the Oak office and was just there to greet the neighborhood kids as they came in each day. So congratulations to Elaine. She's already let me know she is enjoying her retirement thoroughly. Next is Beth Dewing. Beth has worked for our district for 16 years. She is a behavior intervention tech, working with our special education students on various behaviors. And she is just an amazing team player. A big add to every classroom she participated in and worked in to support the students. Jennifer Kiker, our special education director, made particular note that she is quite handy in her design skills and created a drape that fit the face shields so that we could wear, so that staff could wear them in the special education room. So congratulations, Beth, and best wishes for what lies ahead. Next is Terry Dranker. Terry Drinker worked for Los Altos School District. Well, she's still working for Los Altos School District, but for 25 years. I met Terry when I came to the district and was principal at Ullman. She was a special ed instructional assistant over there before Randy plucked her to work in the district office as our purchasing agent. Terry did fantastic in both roles. Her kids went through Ullman, so I knew them as well, knew her as a parent and as a colleague, and she's going to be tough to replace, but we wish her very well as she moves on as well after 25 years. Thanks, Terry. Next is a special education instructional assistant at Block, Barbara Drinkwater. Barbara has worked in the district for 14 years, serving special education students at both Loyola and, as I mentioned, most recently Block. She too, big team player, doing whatever's necessary to support students in her classes. So thank you, Barbara, and best wishes to you. We have a few folks who didn't want mention, but we have a couple of long-time custodians retiring, both after 31 years in our school district. They retired earlier this year, mid-year, but we will miss them and wish them well also. Speaking of 31 years, Cindy Andrews is most recently a library specialist at Block. She runs that Block library for the junior high school students at Block. Cindy has served so many roles in our school district. She taught, she helped with the after school offerings when we had an after school program. And again, most recently, the librarian at Block that she has been for, I don't have a number of years, but it's been quite some time. So Cindy, we wish you well. Thank you for everything you've given Los Altos School District, and congratulations. Janet Milbank retired earlier this year. Janet worked in LASD for 22 years, served a variety of roles from literacy aid to instructional aid in the classroom to special education aid. She was a noon duty assistant and also worked as an office clerk. Janet really, as evidenced by her number of roles, she really was a utility player and did whatever was needed in our district. So congratulations, Janet, and we hope you're enjoying retirement. And lastly, in the classified ranks, Leah Vladimirsky. Leah has been with us for 29 years. She started as an instructional assistant in general education and then moved on to special education, both at Loyola and most recently for quite some time at Block. I know Sandra knows both of the, or three of these retirees from her time at Block as principal as well, in addition to Cindy. But Leah is, again, one of those tireless workers to serve the kids in our school district. So Leah, congratulations and thank you for everything you've done.
I like the name.
I thought you would, Vladimir. All right, moving on to our certificated staff. We also have a number of retirees here. We're going to start first with Marcia Crone. Martha has taught math at Block for 29 years. She is that go-to person for all questions math in our district. Really understanding learning of math, and especially when it comes to junior high school students. She's not just a math teacher, but just a great member of the Block staff. So Marcia, it was great to see you earlier today, and congratulations. Thank you for everything you've done for our kids. Next, Susan Goforth Moths. Susan is a kindergarten teacher at Santa Rita School. This year she's teaching virtually. But Susan has been teaching at Santa Rita in kindergarten for 21 years. She is just the quintessential kindergarten teacher. cares so deeply for those students as they enter our schools. And really, really sorry to see her go. But we wish you the very best, Susan. Thank you. Julie Jenkins. Julie has taught in LASD for 16 years. She has taught at a number of schools. Currently, she's in virtual school teaching 5th grade. Prior to that, she was at Santa Rita, did a stint teaching English at Egan. And when I first met her, she was an upper grade teacher at Springer, teaching both 5th and 6th grade. Fantastic writing teacher. Really helps our students progress, specifically in writing, but she can do it all. But Julie, congratulations. It was great to see you earlier this month, and wish you the very best. All right, next we have Laura Joffe. Laura has been teaching in LASD for 32 years. Laura has done it all. She has been president of LATA. She's taught a 5-6 combination class at Santa Rita. I think that one was back in the day. She started our full day kindergarten program when it was up at the what's now the Gardner Bullis campus, and taught there, and was the teaching principal there during that time. She taught kindergarten at Covington, was principal at Loyola for a time, taught Allman 5th grade, and currently teaching transitional kindergarten at Springer. That is absolutely her sweet spot. Loves what she does, and is a great gateway for students into our district. Laura, we're going to miss you. Congratulations. Sherry Laramie. Sherry is a speech language pathologist. She has worked at a number of sites. She is a do anything person for students. Has taught in Los Altos School District for 21 years as a speech language pathologist, and is really a go-to person. So thank you, Sherry, for everything you've done. We will certainly miss you. Lorena Rowland. Lorena is a science teacher at Block. She has also taught electives there, but her passion is science. Lorena has been at Block for 21 years teaching science. Has taught alongside, I know I was talking to Ricky Hu about her today, and their time together. So Lorena, congratulations. Wish you the best in retirement. And last but not least, Jeannie Sittler. Jeannie has been a substitute teacher in our district. She was an instructional assistant for a time at Oak. She has taught at Covington 1st grade and 2nd grade. She's currently at virtual school teaching 1st grade. She has taught in our district, or worked in our district, for 22 years, having taught for 17 of them. Jeannie is just that person that will do anything kids need. We'll certainly miss you, Jeannie, and wish you the very, very best as you start your next chapter. This is a particularly big year in retirements. All told, the number of years of service to Los Altos School District that is moving on is 420 years. So it's a lot of experience that is leaving our school district after this very special year. But like all things, they do change, and we will stand on their shoulders as we continue to make this district the very, very best it can be. Congratulations to all of you. We will miss you, but we certainly appreciate everything you've done. That's it.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone for your service. You will be missed, and I think it's wonderful that we have people who want to stick around in LASD for so long. It's a special place. Moving along, superintendent's update. Mr. Baird?
I just want to report that we are full steam ahead preparing for our graduations that are coming up quickly. I know that the testing is wrapping up at our school sites. The makeups are going on right now as I was out at schools today. But really, all eyes are on preparing for saying goodbye to our 8th graders and transitioning our 6th graders to our junior high schools.
Great, thank you. On to the consent items. Would any board members like to provide comment on the consent agenda? No? Okay. Then may I please have a motion to approve consent item E1?
I so move.
Thank you, Jessica. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Steve. Motion to approve consent item E1 was made by Jessica and seconded by Steve. Roll call vote. Steve? Vladimir?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. Employee requests to address the board. I don't believe we have anyone from Los Altos Teachers Association or the California School Employees Association. Nope. Okay. All right, we're gonna move on then. Sorry. Okay, community comments. This time is reserved for citizens and employees to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board is not permitted to discuss or take action on non-agenda items, except to instruct the superintendent to review the matter further, report back to the board at a subsequent meeting, or place the matter on a future agenda. The board may make a brief comment or ask clarifying questions. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To do so, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after public comment begins will not be accepted. And let's see. Any requests to speak? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Oh, action and discussion items. School reopening update. Staff will provide an update on the current status of our school reopenings, COVID positivity rates, and initial expectations for the 2021-22 school year. Jeff?
Yes. Thanks, Marcy. Next slide. Since everyone knew what this was, we decided just to keep the same title. COVID numbers remain very low. We know that's also a function of them being low in the county and our community as well. Santa Clara County is doing quite well. We know that we're in the yellow tier now, and that has also proven true with our numbers as well. We have done a terrific job this year. Our staff at the school sites has just done tremendous work, making sure that even though we have had 40 cases or so, 40 positive cases, we haven't experienced that wide outbreak. So great job to all involved. We really think this is some expertise that we're going to be able to leverage as we move into the 21-22 school year. Next slide. A reminder, we are, as directed by the board back in May, working on plans for in-person, full day, full week instruction at all grade levels next year. That includes many of the things that we expect to have on our campuses: after school programs, hot lunch, parent volunteers, various events at schools, and junior high school sports. So we're working through the many layers involved in ensuring that this can happen. Of course, we're also waiting for any updated guidance that might come that would require us to modify anything. We would expect that any updates in guidance that would come would in all likelihood be a bit of loosening to some of the guidelines. So we are planning, but we also recognize, as we have done all year, that this is going to require us to make some changes as new guidance is released. Next slide. So we're really thinking about the idea of building community after we come back next year as well, right? It's one of the facets of Los Altos School District that makes our schools so strong, is that sense of community that comes with our schools. So figuring out how to accommodate for parent volunteers, how to accommodate for orientations as the school year starts, before school even opens, for our kindergartners, for our transitional kindergartners, thinking about our students who have been in virtual school during the course of the year and transitioning them to in-person instruction. Think about schedule days at our junior high schools. Also those morning assemblies and meetings and principal coffees that take place on campus that are really critical to building that knowledge and community of our schools. So really thinking about teacher-led activities as well to build those connections and relationships, not just with the students, but with their families as well. Board meetings is certainly part of that. Marcy and I are doing work investigating what that might look like. How can we took direction from the board at a previous meeting regarding how can we continue this high level of input while also meeting in person, and not just input, but visibility. So we're working on that, looking at various districts across the state. And then again, building those virtual school to neighborhood school connections that we mentioned. Next slide. We know part of returning is going to be the mental wellness of staff and students. We are partnering with CHAC, looking ahead to what we're calling a Back Together program. We piloted it this year in a few of our classrooms within the district, and it was very positively received. It's really an art-based program from CHAC, facilitated by their therapists. There's 6-week programs in the upper grades, 4-week programs in the lower grades, and with all students participating in the fall. And we're really looking at this to help students transition from, for many, what has been a stressful time, and also to be able to identify those students who may need additional support. So this is still in the planning stage with CHAC, but I wanted to just give you an update that we are moving down the road with this. I think Sandra highlighted it in the ELO plan that was approved a couple of meetings back. All right, next slide. And I think that, yep, that's it. So happy to take any questions the board might have.
Thanks, Jeff. Are there any questions from board members regarding the presentation? Nope. Okay. Jeff, can you just confirm the Back Together art program through CHAC, that's in the classroom, right?
That
It's
is
not something that parents have to opt into. Okay.
correct. That's going to be in the classrooms.
That's great. Okay, well, we will now take public comment on this agenda item. To do so, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after public comment begins will not be accepted. Are there any requests to speak? Any requests to speak? Okay, well, seeing none, I'm closing public comment. Board members, would any of you like to provide comment on this agenda item? Nope. Vladimir?
Yeah, this is a comment I flashed before my eyes was a news item that Sacramento is going into the orange So it's not over until it's over. We need still to be vigilant, and there's a possibility that things might get worse before they get better, and hopefully not, but we need to remain vigilant.
Any other comments? Okay, I don't have any comments. Thank you very much, Jeff. Moving on. Public hearing, TK through 5 math curriculum adoption. The Board of Trustees will take public input on the proposed TK to 5 math curriculum adoption. Sandra?
Excellent, thank you. So I have a very short presentation tonight, which you may be happy about after speaking for record time last week on the math adoption. So next slide, Marcy. So we are back to talk about this big question that I brought to you last week. Looking forward to next year, do we want to stay aligned with our current adoption of Envision or formally adopt San Francisco curriculum? That was the big question going to the Curriculum Council this year. Next slide. We talked a little bit about why we've ultimately landed on the San Francisco Unified School District math curriculum and all of the great things that we believe it brings and will be able to support our students with. But I've added 2 additional slides just based on a few rounds of feedback that we've heard. So next slide, Marcy. We are absolutely not San Francisco Unified School District. We don't have similar challenges on any level, but I also know that very large urban school districts have great partnerships through grant money opportunities to work with experts in a variety of fields. We have an example out of Oakland Unified School District who developed amazing computer science curriculum with code.org. You have the good work happening in New York City public schools around their Engage New York, their social science inquiries, all sorts of very large urban school districts have been able to get this great grant money and develop very high quality curriculum. So I wanted to really talk about some of the things about this curriculum that we value. And then the next slide will tell you some things we don't value and why we're happy that they're not there. So when we think about this curriculum, we know it checks all of the basic boxes, right? It's Common Core standard aligned. It is grade level aligned, so every student's going to get their grade level topic. But about midway through this little checklist here are, to me, where the golden nuggets come in. This idea that there is a balance of the conceptual, their procedural, and the application, right? That three circle idea about doing math, that this curriculum really supports that. It's also developed with the best practice of teaching kids to conceptually understand something before we just go right to the procedure or the algorithm of math. So we want to build that conceptual understanding so they discover why that algorithm or that procedure actually works and makes sense. And then we know that they can apply it at a later time. This next one is really critical to me. This idea that language scaffolding supports for students who might not be the primary English language learners or have some language disabilities. This idea that language scaffolds are built into the curriculum, but they don't reduce the cognitive demand of the math work. Oftentimes, what English language learners or students with disabilities, the curriculum that is delivered to them does not meet that high level of demand that we want all students to grapple with. So we're very happy about that. Of course, we love manipulatives and visual aids, and the idea that growth mindset is just built in through this curriculum. And we've done a lot of work as a district around growth mindset. Next slide. Here are a couple of pieces that we're happy not to see within this curriculum. And this is really an evolution of how math instruction has changed over time. Through our Curriculum Council pre-pandemic for 2 years, we actually read chapters of a great book called Principles to Action by the NCTM, the National Councils of Teachers of Mathematics. And these are practices we don't want to see in our math classrooms or in our math curriculum, is this idea of extensive review, that we spend weeks or months reviewing what you were supposed to learn last year. That's not a good practice, and it's not built into this curriculum. We already talked about teaching procedures and algorithms. First, we don't want to see students only doing independent work and not actually talking about the work and engaging in discourse. We know that that's how students learn everything, is through discourse. It's how all of us learn. It's the science of teaching is very clear. And then we're really happy that this curriculum does not push timed tests. We know it doesn't help students learn. Some students adapt very well to timed tests, but not everyone. And we know that there's really no academic benefit for students to be engaging in frequent timed tests to learn their math facts, etc. So while we are not San Francisco Unified School District, we absolutely love their curriculum and believe that it will meet the needs of our students. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, our curriculum council voted 16-1 to recommend this curriculum to you. Next slide, but we're not doing it in isolation. We're coming with a full package, and you've seen my little pig friend here before. So yes, we are recommending that you formally adopt San Francisco curriculum, but we are also developing, or have developed now, I think it's almost complete, a fluency toolkit that teachers across the grade levels will have. And all teachers will be using with their students the free version of Freckle to engage in a little bit more practice and to be able to target that practice for students who might need additional differentiation. So we're very excited about that. Next slide, Marcy. I think I might just have some images of what those fluency toolkits are. They're just about, our amazing IST team is putting these together for all sorts of key skills across the grade levels from TK through 5th grade. And next slide, Marcy. And an important reminder that we're very confident that this will allow our students, as they enter into our 6, 7, 8 math pathways, to continue their great success that we've had in this district around math. We're returning to our pre-pandemic math course pathways. So students going into 7th grade this coming school year will have those CC7, CC7-8, and Algebra 1 options, and our 8th graders will be moved into either CC8 algebra or geometry honors. So we feel very positive about the trajectory of where our students are headed. Next slide. And of course, we have a great implementation plan. As you know, we love to support our teachers in making sure that they feel very competent and confident in the implementation of new curriculum and strategies. So we have a plan for our principals, we have a plan for our teachers, and our coaches are already working within their plan to make sure that they're really well prepared to support teachers next year, should we move forward with this adoption. Next slide. So tonight, you heard the big 30-minute version last week. Tonight, you got the 4-minute version. And then I believe we're going to close the board meeting, go to public hearing, and allow the community to chime in.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Sandra. Board members, do any of you have questions regarding Sandra's presentation? Okay. The public hearing is now open. To provide public input, use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to speaking, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after the public hearing begins will not be accepted. So let's see. Any additional requests to provide public input? Okay, it looks like we have, I'm going to say 2 takers, Allison Gentile and Diane Wharton. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. Thank you.
Our first speaker is Allison Gentile.
Allison, go ahead and unmute.
Maybe we want to move to Diane. Marcy.
Diane Wharton is our next speaker.
Hello.
Hi.
Good evening, board members. I'm Diane Wharton. I teach first grade at Gardner Bullis, and I am just now wrapping up my 25th year of teaching in the Los Altos School District. So I've been through multiple math adoptions as well as Common Core standard adoption, along with the 8 math practices that go with the Common Core math standards. With the shift to Common Core, the learning and work students do is more in-depth, or that's the expectation. And in order to do this kind of teaching, the teachers have already had multiple professional development opportunities around math talks, the Launch Explored summarized lesson format that is in the San Francisco units. And this has all been even before we considered adopting this curriculum. And we've all been trying to integrate these new ways of teaching into old curriculum, kind of like the square peg round hole kind of situation. We've been supplementing to address holes and teach using current best practices and pedagogies. I've taught the San Francisco units over the last 2 years, both virtual and in person. And at this point, I think I've taught most of the units in person at least once. In my experience, this curriculum accomplishes multiple things. It aligns with Common Core and the 8 math practices. It uses best practices and up-to-date math pedagogy. It provides partner and small group collaboration, hands-on learning experiences through math games and learning stations. The students feel very successful, and in addition, it challenges them. They develop a deeper understanding of the math concepts and can explain their math thinking. In my opinion, it gives all students a voice during math lessons as well. So math has looked really differently with this new curriculum, and taught virtually isn't how it is, I think, maximized. So I'm really excited for this adoption and math instruction next year to be able to use these units to their fullest. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Diane. Do we want to see if we can get Allison?
Allison, can you unmute?
I think I just realized what the challenge is. My name is Rachel Doblik, and I think that my hand is showing Allison's name.
You
So
are correct, Rachel.
I will speak. I am also an instructional support teacher, and I have been in Los Altos for 5 years now, and supporting teachers with math curriculum and implementation for the past 3 years. And what I have noticed as one of the strongest components of the San Francisco curriculum is the ability to support students engaging in not only rich and rigorous tasks, but increasing the ability of students to talk about their learning and build not only community with their classmates while discussing their math, but also really allowing them to think critically about the concepts and the strategies that they are learning about and utilizing. We've seen not only on the standardized assessments that are expected by the state that students are expected to explain their thinking, and through this curriculum, students are supported in learning how to explain their thinking, first by talking about their thinking, and then over the course of the curriculum in TK to third, or to TK to fifth, excuse me, writing about their thinking. So they have opportunities every single day to talk about math and to work with partners to clarify their thinking, and then eventually write about their thinking. So I think that the adoption of this curriculum will significantly support all of our students in meeting not only the expectations of standardized tests, which is something that we have to consider, but will also prepare our students to feel confident and engage in a collaborative community setting and really share what they're learning about math. Thank you for your time. Sorry for the confusion.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. The public hearing is now closed. Would any board members like to provide comment on this agenda item? Okay. Great. I don't have any comments either. Sandra, your presentation last week and this week was really super clear and detailed. So thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on. Oh, TK through 5 math curriculum adoption. The Board of Trustees will consider approving the adoption of the TK through 5 math curriculum. Sandra.
Yes, it is a process. I'm back. I have no other supporting documents for you. So it is time, other than saying that we recommend that the board adopt SF curriculum this evening.
Great. Thank you. Board members, any questions for Sandra? Nope. Okay, we will now take public comment on this agenda item. To do so, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after public comment begins will not be accepted. Let's take a peek. Okay. Any additional requests to speak? Okay, looks like we have one. Tom? Oh, Tom, you'll be given 3 minutes.
All right, let's see. Is that working now?
Yep, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Perfect. Sorry, having technical issues. I wanted one question I had, and my apologies if this was missed earlier since I was having some freezing up here. There's been expressions of concern about adopting the program from some of the parents, as I know folks have said previously, just given SF's performance as a whole, which as we know is complicated by a variety of factors. So I just wanted to know if there is any data around other districts that have adopted the program and what the before and after impact has been for comparison purposes as a way to benchmark, using data in a way to determine why this might be good for us by taking out some of the conflation with SF's performance.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Okay. Alrighty. Board members, would any of you like to provide comment on this agenda item? Okay, great. I don't have any further comments either. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the adoption of the SFUSD TK through 5 math curriculum?
Before we do that, Shali, Sandra, do you have any comments to make about the request for data?
I do not know. The curriculum became publicly available open source last year. I don't know if anybody in the middle of the pandemic has fully adopted. I do know that we looked closely at our own data as we had our pilot groups using the curriculum to see how students were performing, and perhaps across schools if teachers were using different curriculum, and our students continued to do incredibly well. And we've heard anecdotally from our teachers that students through this curriculum are able to explain their thinking much more clearly and can apply their skills as compared to some of our older curriculum and or teacher created curriculum. But no, I don't think it's been around publicly available long enough to really have access to that data.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra. May I please have a motion to approve the adoption of the SFUSD TK through 5 math curriculum?
So moved.
Thank you, Jessica. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Steve. Motion to approve the adoption of the SFUSD TK through 5 math curriculum was made by Jessica and seconded by Steve. Any further board discussion? Okay. We shall do a roll call vote. Vladimir?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Sandra, for all your hard work on this.
Thank you.
All righty. Moving on. Collective bargaining agreement with CSEA. The Board of Trustees will consider approving the 2021-22 negotiated agreement with the district's classified staff. Randy?
Yes, thank you. This is an action item. We're recommending that you approve this tentative agreement we have with our classified employee group as backup to this agenda item on agenda online. We have a copy of the tentative agreement. We have the collective bargaining disclosure, which discloses the financial impact to the district, which is a requirement. We shared that with you at the last board meeting, and we need to share it again tonight. We also have the letter from the county that's reviewed the collective bargaining disclosure and agree that we're able to honor this tentative agreement and meet all of our other financial obligations. So I'm going to turn it back to you with the recommendation that you approve this tonight.
Thanks, Randy. Board members, do any of you have questions for Randy? Nope. Okay. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To do so, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after public comment begins will not be accepted. Okay, let's see. Any requests to speak? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Board members, would any of you like to provide any comment on this agenda item? Nope. Okay, then may I please have a motion to approve the 2021-22 collective bargaining agreement with CSEA?
So moved.
Thank you, Jessica. May I have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Steve. Motion to approve the 2021-22 collective bargaining agreement with CSEA was made by Jessica and seconded by Steve. Any further board discussion? Nope. Okay. Roll call vote. Vladimir?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, everyone. Okay, next we have the Citizens Advisory Committee for Finance Annual Report. The Citizens Advisory Committee for Finance will present its annual report of findings and recommendations. Randy?
Yes, you know that our Citizens Finance Committee's been active all year. They gave you a mid-year report, and Fred Gallagher, the chair of the committee, is here tonight to present the annual report. So I'm just going to turn it over to Fred.
Great, thank you, Randy. Good evening to the Board of Trustees, Superintendent Bear, and staff. I'm very much delighted to make this year's annual presentation for the CACF. We currently have 12 talented, dare I say, very talented individuals who are contributing their time, to advise the districts on financial matters. Personally, it is a great experience to be working with these folks in this endeavor. So most of these slides were written to be read. I'm going to assume that you've done that. And so I'm going to gallop through these out of respect for your time this evening. There are a couple topics, though, that I'd like to dive into a little bit deeper. So we'll move to the next slide, please. We'll go on to slide number 3. So for the items in the presentation, reserves, they look great. You're going to see the board, the budget proposal later this evening. We're in solid shape there. We'll talk about a couple of reasons why, which are around the tax collection growth, and then the enrollment trend that we've been experiencing. I'll spend more time talking about facilities maintenance costs and ask that the Board of Trustees and the district address it this year. And then, something that's, I know the board staff has spent an absolute great deal of time and has a number of concerns about, okay, how do we address the needs of the students when they return in the fall? We'll also talk a little bit about getting prepared for the longer term risks associated with that. So we'll go to the next slide. So the chart, let me just cover the chart on the right here. What this shows is our reserves position by school year. It's historical through the 2019 to 20 year. It's projected for the 20 to 21 and 21 to 22 year. And you'll see that, we're projected to be in a great spot this year as well as next year. What I would highlight to the board is number of those years when we were below the 8% threshold. A primary driver was our facilities, or what we call plant services costs. And so that had hit us in the past. And so we'll talk a bit more about that. And we've analyzed a number of scenarios. We'll spare you the number of scenarios that we reviewed. Suffice to say, we feel that the district has sufficient reserves at this time. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that's helped us, what this chart shows on the right, is our tax collection growth. And so you see we've had pretty stable tax collection growth since the 2014 year. And so just a couple of observations I would highlight to the Board of Trustees is that if you look at the low that we have on this chart was actually a negative year. And that was actually after the recession of the 2008 recession. So it was actually 2 to 3 years after the recession. So the point that we make in the appendix is that we typically have a lag on when we see the fallout from an economic disruption or recession here. The other point, which is not highlighted on the chart, the district's long-term expense growth has been just above 5%, so 5.2%. So we actually had a debate amongst the CACF, or do we have our head completely above the water or just our nose? Still, we're above water in terms of where we are, and it's kind of what you would expect is so we would be growing expenses in line with what our long-term revenue growth was. So that's what I'd highlight there, and this is what's helped us. And I'll cover some scenarios that we have on this in a few more slides. So move on to slide 6. So enrollment. Again, all of you know, because we're a basic aid, a decline in enrollment, logically could provide some relief to expenses for the district. And so that's one of the things we're highlighting here. Another point in the chart, the reason for that chart there, when you look at it, for the most part, except for 2 to 3 years, we've moved in line with a number of the other districts nearby, as well as Santa Clara County. We did have a few years in the 2013 time period where we were, above and actually considerably above the other districts and the county. And so we just wanted to highlight, hey, we're kind of seeing the same trend that others are seeing there. Longer term, other forces that are playing in our enrollment. We did spend quite a bit of time with the demographer this year to understand, what happened. We reviewed a lot of data, and I'll cover sort of the projections on the next slide. Some of the forces, the longer term forces that are in play here, is that we are seeing in California a lower birth number. So there are fewer children being born in the state. We are seeing some migration out of the state as well. The countervailing force that we're seeing, which is highlighted in the appendix, is we have considerable new housing coming online in our district. And so those play against each other. Those are some of the things we discussed with the demographer, and I'll move to the next slide, which in the multi-year projection, we have, this is what we've come up with, which is the projections are in the orange. A few things that I would just highlight for you here. What we did is we went back and looked at where we were, say in the end of the 2019 school year, and looked at where, what was the line that was taking place there. And by the time we get out to fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, this projection is pretty close to what we had pre-pandemic. And so for that reason, we felt that it was reasonable based upon that. It's been a few years since we've seen an increase in enrollment, so that does put some additional pressure. The orange line is what's baked into the budget numbers. And so, again, we felt, given where the scenarios came out, that this was a reasonable projection. The biggest question that we had was really, what is the educational state going to be of the students that when they return in the fall? So we do expect students to return. And so we'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. So one of the things, and I know this group is, the board and staff spent a great deal of time trying to assess, okay, where are we going to be in the fall from a what we're calling a learning loss perspective. And by the way, we're using that terminology because that's what is being used by the state and federal government in providing funds. We're not pretending that we can say that we have learning loss or anything like that. We're just using similar terminology. And so which grades are going to return? Are students that were held back going to return? Are there mental health issues, or what's going to come up? We won't know. And so we've had a lot of concerns in those. If you don't go there now, but if you were to read slide 19, it's an eye chart. It covers some of the scenarios that we discussed as a group as to what the board and staff should think about as they're looking at the financial implications of the post-pandemic world. Suffice it to say, we came up with a concise summary here, which is, look, learning loss should be the priority going into the new year. Our view was that a lot of the assessment has been remote. Having an in-person assessment would be prudent to do that very quickly upon the start of the school year. There's ample, if not almost abundant, resources available from state and federal government to start to address some of these. Much of that funding, as far as we understood, expires in the summer of 22. And so the concern from a financial perspective is we could be looking at a situation where there may be some needs of students that would want to be addressed later. So we said, hey, look, we should address as much as we possibly can by the end of next school year to take advantage of these funds, assess where we are, and then start to incorporate any longer term programs into the subsequent year budgets. So hopefully that was articulate. It was a mouthful. We can come back for questions on that. Let me go ahead and go to the next chart, number 9. So I'm shifting gears here. I want to talk about plant services and capital. When I spoke about reserves earlier, what we had seen over a period of time was our operating budget was impacted by about $7 million from that 2014 through the 19 fiscal year. One thing we did additionally this year, and it's the very last page of the presentation in the appendix, is we went and analyzed what other districts are spending in terms of plant services. And so this is what they're spending from the general fund. And what you see is the black line is the median of what those districts have spent. And you can see starting in that 2014 to 2015 fiscal year, we start to deviate. Most of the districts are in that 8 to 9%. The median is in the 8 to 9%. What you'll see in the appendix is for most of the last 5 years, we've been above the other districts. So we're spending more, and you might even say considerably more, 36% above the mean compared to other districts. And so our view is that this is really an outcome that we have some aging facilities that are in need of repair and replacement. And so that's what this slide is showing. So if we move on to the next slide, what we're asking the district to do is to address this year. Right now, we don't have a mechanism in place that limits the use of operating funds. We have a deferred maintenance fund, which has a very modest amount inside of it. And so then we start turning to operating funds to address maintenance, repair, and replacement. And so this is really intended to prevent that impingement on the operating fund by using some of the Measure N funds. And it's really clear, what you would typically want as a best practice is we have our master plan, facilities master plan, which is being updated, and you'd like to see a programmatic long-term approach to funding facilities. We're in an odd period where we don't have those funds there to do that. And so for a period of time, we're recommending that we have some of the capital funds in place to start to prevent from that encroachment onto the operating funds. We absolutely agree that we should stay within the language of Measure N with the oversight associated with that. And what I would also say, I had some questions on this slide after it went out, is that this is not a catch-up. It's really guarding against impinging on operating funds. And we really need to, it would be considerably more to have some type of catch-up to bring us in line with what we'd want to have as a long-going cost for our operating budget as it relates to plant services. And I think, another way that I was looking at it just personally is it is a set of funds that, right now we're hoping that we don't have any hits to our operating budget from plant services. By putting this fund in place, we can be more proactive to say, hey, if there's a roof or an HVAC or some other system that needs to be addressed, we can be more proactive within a year as opposed to waiting till it breaks. And so that's another way that I would describe what we're trying to do. And that's why we speak to an aspect of making the facilities slightly more resilient so we don't see interruptions. Really want to prevent the general fund from being encroached upon. And then finally, I think the lesson we've learned is stuff happens, the unexpected happens. And so that's what we've learned this year. So, so that's it on capital. Why don't we go 2 slides? And so now we did some scenario analyses. I'm going to highlight just the chart on the right. The green line, that chart is tax collection growth. The multi-year projection is the green line. So we are being, we thought we were actually being conservative with that green line. That's what's in the budget. There was much discussion that it could be higher, but we settled on that line. We also wanted to have a recession scenario. We discussed others. We have the low point of the recession being 2 to 3 years after the actual recession. Actually, that make any sense? We had the low point of that red line 2 to 3 years after the depth of the recession is what you're seeing there. The short answer is on the next slide, is that when you looked at all of these scenarios, we have reserves that are at or above our the district's board policy for reserves of 8 to 10%. The only scenario where we went below the 8% was the one in which we have both an impact from the recession, the scenario that we outlined there, as well as we continued 2% annual raises each year. All right. So that's what that shows. So again, it's a great picture. I could stare at this one for a while, but we'll go on to the next slide. We considered a number of scenarios inside of our analyses. These were items that we didn't include. You could spend a lot of time in analyzing things, but these are other issues that might come up, but they're not included in the analysis above. And so I'll go to the next slide. So recommendations, we've covered learning loss, absolutely. The CACF members, support this being the highest priority in addressing, the post-pandemic educational programs, maximizing the funding that's available. We really do want to create a fund and address the facilities maintenance costs. We say immediately, it's, that's, we mean this year. Determining long-term expenses that, could come out of the pandemic. We need to look at the assessments that we see when we get to in-person learning, and we'd like to incorporate that into next year's budget. And, adopting a budget that maintains reserves. We've had that every year, and I expect to have it in every year going forward. But that's, we're in a great spot as it relates to the reserves. Two more, actually, we'll go to the next slide. We have wanted to have a parking spot to request projects that the Board of Trustees would like us to take on. In lieu of just showing a blank slide, we actually prepared some ideas on the subsequent slide. If you can go to that. So 4 areas where, we want to make suggestions. Recruiting and retention, the belief system being, as we come out of this, it could be more challenging to recruit people to the district. It's not getting cheaper to live here. There's a number of items that would fall under that umbrella. Analyzing the ongoing impact of funding learning loss is another item. Looking at the move to a middle school, taking 6th grade to a middle school type of program, and then having a framework that starts to look at a longer term, say 10 years of thinking, how do we budget, how do we balance a budget over a longer term horizon than just year to year? The group is absolutely open to getting feedback and requests from the board and staff in terms of what we should be looking at for next year. So again, really delighted to make the presentation this year. Glad that we have this year behind us almost, and that we're in a great financial position to address what's coming at us. So with that, I'd like to get any feedback that you might have, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Fred. Board members, do any of you have questions for Fred about the presentation? Okay, we will now take public comment on this agenda item. To do so, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after public comment begins will not be accepted. Any requests to speak? All right, seeing none, I am closing public comment. Board members, would you like to provide comment on this agenda item? Vladimir?
Fred, thank you again for great presentation and the work that you do on you and your fellow members of the CACF. I only have one question, comment, something like that. If we go to slide 7, where you have some multi-year projections for enrollment, I think it would be helpful if we had some idea of the bounds that the projections could take. So right now, you're just providing us with a number, right?
Right.
And that's the most probable number. Presumably, it's the most probable outcome that you think of. But there are other outcomes that have a little less probability. I don't know how much that range is, and it'd be helpful, I think, to understand that. That's the only comment that I have. But thank you for your work.
Sure thing.
Any other comments for Fred? All right. Oh, Brian.
Sorry. Yeah, just to echo Vladimir's thank you, Fred, to you and to the rest of the committee. I think the only comment that I have is sort of in support of CACF's repeated call to use the Measure N funds, to set aside a fund so that we can have a known pot of funds to do facilities work, and to do it potentially sooner rather than later. I think that is something we need. I think it wasn't clear, Fred, whether by this year you meant this school year or this calendar year. The impression I get generally from the CACF is by this year they mean 3 years ago. But we probably can't do it obviously this school year, given what day it is. But I certainly would be in favor of working on that as soon as we can, as soon as we're back in August.
Right.
Steve?
And Fred and I had this conversation when he briefed us on, I think he reached out to all of us to brief us on this. And I actually, in inverse of Brian's comment there, my concern is, as the last board member who actually was on and sold the community on the idea of Measure N, what we sold them on was 10 schools, 10 sites. And if we start to niddle away too much of that money, we won't be able to deliver on that promise. And I think ultimately we will not be able to pass bonds in the future, because we will no longer be trusted to do that. So before we run down that path of creating that fund, which I understand the need for, and I agree with the idea, we need to come up with a lot more clarity of what we're going to do with that 10th site and how we're going to deliver on building there before we start saying, continuing to earmark funds off of that. And I'd like us to keep that in mind as we move forward and have our conversations about it. That's all.
Thanks, Steve. Any further comments for Fred?
Oh, sorry, not for Fred. This is for Jeff. It sounds like we need to devote some significant amount of time to answering Steve's concerns. And so that sounds to me like at least a study session on this topic, because although I agree with Brian that we should do it sooner rather than later, I also agree with Steve that we have made some promises to the community, and to understand what those promises are and what it entails would be worthwhile.
Thank you, Vladimir. Jessica?
Along the lines of what Steve and Vladimir and Brian have said, I think it is something we bring up in the fall, is that we really start looking again as to what we're doing with our facilities, including the 10 site. Hopefully by the beginning of the school year next year, we'll be able to start back up the process. I don't know where we start the process up again. I don't know what that looks like, but for sure, while it may start as a study session, it will be a continued process. It's tangential really to Fred's CACF request for a maintenance fund, but to even get there, we need, I agree with Steve. We, Shally and I ran that campaign. We did promise 10 schools, 10 sites. And if we had money left over, we'll make improvements to the schools. That is literally how we sold it. So I agree. And along the lines of your projects to consider, I definitely agree with every last one. Yeah, so that's it.
Thank you, Jessica. And Fred, I really want to thank you so much for this incredible presentation. Many thanks to you and the CACF, because I know how in-depthly you guys analyze stuff. I agree with all the future projects, as Jessica said. The one that I guess is top of mind for me is retention and recruitment for teachers and staff, and what we can do to sort of make up the gap between our school district and other school districts. So yeah, there's that. But I have no other comments. So thank you so much for coming out tonight.
And maybe just one comment back is happy to, so if there is a need for a study session, happy to dust off or even update our analyses on some of these topics. So I'm happy to commit that. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred.
Holly,
Yes.
so just,
Randy's got his hand
yeah,
up.
sorry, one last comment. Not only want to thank Fred for making the presentation tonight, but he's done an outstanding job of leading that committee the last couple of years, and putting a heck of a lot of his own time and work into not only the committee but also the reports that come to the board. It's definitely driven by Fred, and thank you so much, Fred.
You're welcome, Randy. Thanks, Randy. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Okay, moving on now. Our
Thanks,
next
Mom.
agenda item. Good night, Fred. The Budget Review Committee recommendations. Staff will share the Budget Review Committee recommendations in preparation for the board's deliberation and adoption of the district's 2021-22 budget. Randy?
First, I better unmute. Yes, you've got a copy of the recommendations in the packet. I'm not going to read it. It's basically, we're saying it's somewhat of a status quo. Looking at a status quo scenario for next year, we have adequate reserves to handle adequate reserves in COVID funding to handle any expected COVID expenses. And we have a significantly positive reserve level. So there's no recommended cuts or major changes in program offerings other than anything that relates to the pandemic. So you have a recommendation from the committee that not only covers the budget, but also the LCAP. Now I'm losing the acronym, Sandra.
Local control and accountability
you.
plan.
Yeah,
I do it
local
all the
control and
time.
accountability plan, not learning continuity. Also, they recommend approval of the LCAP as presented tonight. So it's just a discussion item. There's no action required at this point. You'll take that action next week at the budget adoption hearing next week. Well, happy to answer any questions, Shelley.
Great, thank you, Randy. Does anyone have any questions for Randy? I just had a quick question, and I guess it's for both Randy and Sandra. In the recommendations, you're recommending that the workload budget where we're not implementing any new programs. Does the new math curriculum fall under that, or is that separate? Or does that not get covered by that recommendation?
I think they're kind of apples and oranges. We're just really talking about curriculum, which is free curriculum. It's not a whole program. When we think of programs, we might think of like a pre-K program or a new drama program or something bigger than just new curriculum.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. All right, we will now take public comment on this agenda item. To do so, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after public comment begins will not be accepted. Okay. Any further requests to speak? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Board members, would any of you like to provide comment on this agenda item? Okay, I don't have any comment other than I'm so glad we don't have to make cuts. All right, thank you so much, Randy. Moving on. Public hearing 2020 to 21 annual update. Sandra will provide the 2020-21 annual update for public input.
All right. Well, I've tried to make an overview slide because it is the evening of public hearings tonight. And in the last 2 months, 3 months, I have written more plans than my brain can contain, and they all go together, but they're all very discrete. So I thought I would start with an updated graphic for you. So in the circle there, we have multiple federal local education agency plan requirements that need to have public hearing and be adopted over the course of 1 or 2 meetings. You have our federal addendum is coming next week. That consolidated application for funding has been delayed, and I don't know, they keep saying like by the end of June, but I expect that you will see that in the fall. That's another plan that we will write. But the big ones tonight are up top there that have to do with our LCAP. We're going to start first with the annual updates, and which is where the red star is. So 2 annual updates together. Next slide, Marcy. The annual updates come together because we had an LCAP that we were working under last year, a local control and accountability plan. But then, of course, the pandemic interrupted everything we were doing. We were unable to do our spring testing last spring. So even so, we are required to write an LCAP annual update that really highlights what did we accomplish versus what we said we were going to accomplish. Where did we spend our money? How much money did we spend? What were the results of the metrics we were looking at? And as you reviewed that annual update of the LCAP, you could see most of the metrics said we couldn't gather this data because of the pandemic. But as of March of last year, that got interrupted. And then we turned and we brought to you at the very beginning of this year, I think, an LCP, a Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. And that one really has guided the bulk of our work this year. And this was a much more streamlined version of how are you going to support in-person learning? How are you going to support distance learning? How are you going to support the social and emotional well-being? How are you going to engage families? It was very specific. So the annual update, if you had a chance to read through in the packet, you really noticed that we carried out almost every single item of our LCP plan for this year, with the exception of not being able to offer our summer school program last year. That was really the one big budget difference that we were just unable to, because of the pandemic, offer that as a program. So tonight I'm coming to you for a public hearing around, next slide please, Marcy, around the annual update for these 2 plans, the local control and accountability plan from 1920 that was interrupted, and then this year's 2021 LCP plan. So we will move to public hearing. The public hearing was noticed. We've followed all the requirements. The document has been available to the public. You're going to hold the public hearing, and then next week we'll come back and then you will consider that for adoption. It's important to note that this public hearing has to happen at the same meeting as the LCAP public hearing and the budget adoption public hearing. They all go together.
Thank you.
Back to you, Shelley.
Okay, board members, do any of you have questions for Sandra? No. Okay. The public hearing is now open. To provide public input, use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to speaking, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after the public hearing begins will not be accepted. Okay, let's see. Any further requests to provide public input? Okay, seeing none, the public hearing is now closed. Would any board members like to provide comment on this agenda item? Okay. Great. All right, I don't have any comments either, so thank you, Sandra.
Excellent. We'll come back next week and you will consider that for adoption. So next up, you'll notice the red star has moved. So it is time now to bring to you the LCFF budget overview for parents. Next slide, Marcy. The budget overview for parents. I think this is maybe the second or third year it's been a requirement as part of the LCAP, and I work closely. I'll have to give my shout out to Lirio, our new financial gal, who's been my partner over the last, along with Randy, for the last month as we've been working through all of these crazy plans. Next slide, please. The budget overview for parents is a 3-page document. The first page, I'm not sure what's happening, but we'll go with it. There we go. The first page of the budget overview for parents really highlights where our projected revenue is coming from, what the funding sources are for our district. That's page 1 in the 2 circle graphs. The middle page really talks about how much money are we going to account for within our LCAP for the coming year. So Randy has in the green, we know that we have about $68 million in expenditures planned for next year, but only 41 million of those are outlined in the LCAP. And you can see below, it tells you what's not included. And those are things like salaries, I can't even read, our human resources, the business office, maintenance and operations. There's a whole list of things. And we talked about not doing the everything but the kitchen sink LCAP this year. So it's much more streamlined as to what is required to be in the LCAP. So that's the middle page for parents. The last page of the budget overview for parents really highlights this current year. How much money did we budget for? In this document, they refer to students as high needs students. In our LCAP, they're referred to as our unduplicated students. Those are our English learners, our foster and homeless youth, and our low socioeconomic students. So going along with our LCP plan that you heard earlier, we had budgeted this year to spend about $1.7 million to support our unduplicated students. But in actuality, we're going to spend about 1.5 million because again, we did not offer summer school last year. So that was really the significant cost difference there between what we budgeted and what our actuals will be. So this 3-page budget overview is really just meant to be a little more parent friendly than Randy's large budget document and my large LCAP document. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, these documents have been noticed and available to the public. We're going to have our public hearing tonight, and they have to go along with the LCAP and the budget public hearings. And then next week, you will consider adopting this as part of the total package of adoption. Back to you, Shally.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Board members, do any of you have questions for Sandra before I open the public hearing? No? Okay. The public hearing is now open. To provide input, use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to speaking, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after the public hearing begins will not be accepted. Any requests to provide public input? Okay, seeing none, the public hearing is now closed. Board members, would any of you like to provide comment on this agenda item? Okay, great. I have no comments either, Sandra. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next.
Public hearing 2021-22 local control and accountability plan. Oh, the star has moved.
The star has moved. You've
I love
seen the pattern now. So now we are into our next public hearing item, and this is for our upcoming LCAP for 21-22 school year, next school year. Our goals are really seen as a 4-year plan, but the plan itself for the budget is for next year. So next slide, please. So as always, the LCAP follows a fairly consistent process. It always begins with a plan summary that talks a little bit about our district and what we believe and what we value. There's a whole section on stakeholder engagement, which is a really important process of developing our LCAP. As you know, we've brought to the board new goals and actions for this upcoming several years, and we've pushed those out through a stakeholder survey for staff, students, and families. We've brought it to our DLAC, we've brought it to our curriculum council, we've brought it to our budget review. We've gotten quite a bit of feedback and have made some changes, and those are indicated as well. And then, so it goes through each of the goals, actions, and services of what our estimated costs are for each of those pieces. And then finally, the last section is really around how we plan to increase and improve services for our unduplicated pupils. Next slide. So as a reminder, we do have new goals, and we brought these to you, and they've been tweaked along the way, but you can see the updated goals there. And I really put a gold star next to goal 3 and 4, because I think they're all important goals and everything we need to be working toward. But that goal 3 and 4, when we're thinking about post-pandemic, we know how important it is that our tiered system of support for students is critical, that our social and emotional support for our students and staff is critical, and certainly rebuilding our communities post-pandemic and re-engaging our parents and our students and staff will be especially critical next year. So we are very excited about our plans for that for the coming school year. Next slide. Specifically, when we talk about increased and improved services for our unduplicated pupils, I just wanted to give you a sense, because again, I've written a whole bunch of plans. You all have read a bunch of plans, and they all get jumbled together. So I just wanted to highlight for you what we are planning for this upcoming year. We are training teachers this summer and in early fall in evidence-based intervention strategies. We are using a lot of our COVID monies to purchase, and learning loss monies to purchase, new intervention curriculum, which we're very excited about. We just have not had the money in the past to be able to broadly have a good supply of that curriculum, which is excellent. And that's both for reading and math, which we're really excited about. We're using some of it at summer school, and then additionally out at our school sites next year. We are going to be providing supplemental hours for both teachers and or staff to provide intervention. So that could be during the school day, before or after the school day. And then we're really augmenting our summer program. We are serving many more students than we have in the past. We are using our new curriculum, which is very evidence-based, and hiring more staff to lower that adult and student ratio, which we're really excited about, because we know that that makes a big impact for students. Next slide. So it's time. I think this is the last of mine, and then we'll throw it over to Randy. But again, all of these have been shared. There's been a thorough stakeholder process. The draft has been updated multiple times based on stakeholder feedback, the actions more so than the goals. And then tonight you will hold this public hearing and then move it over to Randy for his budget. And next week will be a big week, hopefully, of adopting all of our required plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Board members, any questions about this presentation? Nope. Okay. The public hearing is now open. To provide public input, use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to speaking, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after the public hearing begins will not be accepted. Alrighty. Any requests to provide public input? Okay, seeing none, the public hearing is now closed. Would any board members like to provide comment on this agenda item? I don't have any comments either. Thank you so much, Sandra. All right, moving along. Public hearing, 2021-22 district budget. Randy will provide the proposed 2021-22 district budget for public input.
Thank you. So here we go. I'll be brief. So next slide, please. So we, as Sandra indicated, this will be a night of public hearings. So you'll have a public hearing now. You can take input from the public, and next week you will be asked to adopt our budget. So we're going to go to the next slide. And that's kind of a header. So we'll go one more slide. So I think it's important to look at the key assumptions that underline the projections. So obviously, parcel taxes are two-thirds and more of our revenues. So we are projecting 4% tax growth next year, which we think is a fairly conservative projection. Right now, as of today, our assessed value growth from last year to the upcoming year is over 5%. And we still have a month to go before we close out the assessed roll for next year. So 4% seems highly likely for next year. Next slide. Just a comment about the impact of the charter school. So we transfer property tax revenues to the charter school on a per student basis based on the funding formula from the state. And as the state per student amount increases, that will augment the funds that go to the charter school. And the governor in his May revised proposals has proposed a COLA for next year, which will increase on a per student basis the funding to the charter school. So that's included in our budget as part of one of our assumptions. Next slide. So other key revenue assumptions, you can read the slide. I'll just focus on state funding. You know, you've heard the hoopla about the May revise. The financial condition of the state is quite good. And there's a lot of money proposed for schools. But as a basic aid district, you know, a lot of that's not going to come our way. It's going to go mostly to non-basic aid districts. But there are some new programs and investments that the governor proposes. So we will see how those play out when they get to adopting the budget later this month. And when we come to you in July with an update based off of, we'll come to you in August, I guess, based off the state adopted budget that happens later this month, and we get information in July, we'll see what any of those programs and investments, how much will materialize for our district. Next slide. On the expense side, I just want to highlight the fact that we are projecting fewer teachers next year by 6 full-time equivalents. And you can note that we had sufficient staffing in the current year because our enrollment expectation was higher than the actual number of students that showed up. And so we've had smaller than normal class sizes. And we have sufficient room for additional students to show up next year as we've been doing our staffing planning and looking at the enrollments school by school, grade by grade for next year. In terms of the registrations, we have plenty of room to add students without hiring more teachers. So 6 fewer teachers projected for next year and room for more students. Next slide. So with that, I'm pleased to present a very good-looking financial condition in our general fund. You can see that we're actually have revenues exceeding expenditures by around $900,000. So our balance, our ending balance and our reserves is going up. So we're looking at almost a 15% reserve at the end of the budget year, up from about 12.5% at the end of the current year. Next slide. Kind of interesting to look at a comparison to the current year, so you can get a sense of what might have changed. The big change is we have a lot of one-time funding in the current year, both from state and federal sources to deal with the pandemic. So those go away in the budget year. Thus, our total revenues are down, even though, for example, property tax growth is up. Next slide. On the expense side, you would expect expenses normally to go up, but there was a lot of one-time money poured into the 2021 year. And what we show currently is the working budget for 2021, or what we estimate to be spent, even though we know some of those monies aren't going to be spent in the current year. For example, there's money budgeted for COVID to offset the revenues, but we know we aren't going to be able to spend that all, so it'll be carried forward next year. And I do realize that on this slide, there's nothing in the first line for certificated salaries where it talks about the difference from one year to the next to 6 fewer teachers, that we have increases for a raise and step and column movement. What's missing is the fact that we've also budgeted money for certificated salaries in the current year just to offset the revenues from COVID funding. And those monies aren't going to be spent. We have over $2 million budgeted in certificated salaries that will essentially carry forward into next year. Okay, and those, a large part of those are dedicated to the ELO plan, that expanded learning opportunities plan that Sandra presented a couple meetings ago. Next slide. So turning to looking at a multi-year projection to see what it looks like, not just for next year. So every one of these bullet points is important. I'm not going to read them, but they're kind of key bullet points for the multi-year projection in terms of assumptions. So next slide. This is what it looks like. And if you were to look at, you can see the growing reserve levels from almost 15% at the end of the budget year to approximately double the end of the 5-year horizon here. But if you look at the adjusted beginning balance in the current year, 21-22, in the general fund, that's actually the ending balance for the current year, about $5.5 million. And you can see that the general fund reserves grow in the last year to about triple that amount, almost $17 million. So what's happening is you're getting the increase of revenues over expenses every year, and that compounds as you look at reserves over time here. So very positive scenario as a base case based on all the assumptions that we have underpinning these projections. Next slide. I just want to mention that there's other funds besides our operating fund, our general fund. So next slide. So we have 2 special reserve funds. One is used to make up our reserves. That's the Fund 17 that has about 3.6 million. And then we have a small fund that we used to use to account for post-employment benefits for health benefits for retirees. That fund is no longer needed, but we've kept a small amount in that fund should we ever need to resurrect putting more money in there. Next slide. And then we have 3 capital funds. Our deferred maintenance fund, talked about briefly during the CACF presentation, a modest around $300,000 every year we're spending on facilities upkeep. In the building fund, which includes our measure end bond fund, we have not a significant change in the ending balance from one year to the next. And our capital facilities fund, which comes from developer fees. Currently don't know what our revenues are going to be for the upcoming year. We had over 2 million in the current year, which helped boost our fund balance to almost 1.7 million. We have expenses, mostly those are related to portable rental costs. And so we're showing a possible decline in fund balance of about $600,000 until we know more about any possible additional revenues. The $500,000 is based off some historical averages during, I'll call normal years where we didn't have any big projects being built in our community. Next slide, which may be the last one. It is. So questions, and just noting that the adoption is scheduled for next week at June 8th. Turn it back to you, Shali.
Thank you, Randy. Do any board members have questions for Randy on his presentation? Brian?
Just a question that was spurred by that last slide, Randy, in your comments. Given that we're reducing the number of teachers for next year, sort of where are we on portables? I assume we're not removing any portables, but maybe we are, or I don't remember offhand where we are in our portable empire.
Yeah, right now we're not planning on removing any as of now. We don't yet know what it's going to look like. We needed all the extra buildings this year. So originally a year ago, we were thinking about removing some, but when the pandemic hit and we needed them to have smaller classes and spread the kids out more. Right now, we don't have any plans to remove them, but we will see what the enrollments turn out to be, Brian, and maybe even during the middle of the year, we could remove some, not sure. We'll
Thanks.
look at it again next spring.
Vladimir?
Randy, on slide 16, thank you for numbering the slides, by the way. The 21-22 expense line has underlined numbers, and I was wondering what the underlining meant.
You're muted, Randy.
I don't have slide 16 in front of me. I can go look unless you want. You're going to bring it up, Marcy, or shall I go look for it?
I think it just represents, Vladimir, that one number is being subtracted from the other for the net change number.
Oh yeah, so if you have, yeah, revenue.
Oh, so that's okay, I got it, yeah.
Any other questions for Randy before we open the public hearing? Okay, great. The public hearing is now open. To provide input, please use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to speaking, please be sure your microphone is on. Requests received after the public hearing begins will not be accepted. Okay. Any requests to provide public input? Okay, seeing none, the public hearing is now closed. Would any board members like to provide comment on this agenda item? Okay, I have no further comments either. Thank you so much, Randy. Okay, moving on now, board and administration comments. This time is for the board and administration to report on non-agenda items such as committee reports, school activities, legislation, and future agendas. Randy.
2 quick comments. The Measure End Citizens Oversight Committee will be bringing its annual report to you at the next meeting on June 8th. And we had at the end of last week, we had a very successful sale of our bands, our bond anticipation notes. And I will send you a memo this week outlining all the details of that successful sale.
Thank you, Randy. Sandra?
I don't think I have anything to report tonight.
Thanks. Jeff?
Yeah, just a couple of items. One, just a reminder to Shali and Vladimir, we have a city schools subcommittee meeting tomorrow evening, and that's at 7:15. Also, this Friday, 2 o'clock, we are having our virtual picnic. Just to wrap up the year with the staff, I'm going to have an invitation sent to each of you if you can attend. It would be great. Shali, if you could say a few words, we can talk about that. That would be fantastic also. But I'll send you that invitation. And then, as I said earlier, just looking ahead to next Wednesday when we wrap up the school year and have a bunch of kids graduating to go up to high school. Looking forward to that.
Awesome.
In person.
I can't believe next week is the last week of school. That's amazing. Okay, board members, Vladimir?
Yeah, I was going to echo Jeff's mention of the city schools subcommittee meeting. I expect a huge turnout there. And I'd like to commend Jessica and Steve for smoothly making motions, and Shali for doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 public hearings, which is a world record.
Thanks, Vladimir. Jessica?
What did I have? We had the ELL reclassification celebration last Wednesday. Went off really well. Actually, we set aside about an hour. I would say it all got done in about a half hour. It was a drive-up celebration, and fun was had by all. And it was good to be celebrating stuff in person again. And so, yeah, I very much enjoyed that. I also attended the county budget thing done by Capital Advisors. My only comment on that is it's amazing, that they do this for us, but they almost never bring up anything having to do with basic aid districts. So it was sadly a waste of my time for our district. I learned how much, other districts may get, but we're not getting any as far as we know.
Jessica, if I can just tag on to that, the one thing we are watching, I have actually been in contact with both of our elected representatives regarding is the governor's may revise that expands transitional kindergarten. Currently without funding for community funded districts. That's up in the air. It's a point of discussion right now. So certainly something we're keeping our eye on and contacting our electeds about. You might all want to do the same.
Great, thank you. Steve? Brian?
No, nothing that I can coherently express at this hour.
Okay, I have nothing further to add other than what Vladimir and Jeff have added. Thank you, everyone, for tonight, and have a wonderful evening. This meeting is adjourned. Bye.